Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about a series that I did not finish reading. So we all have the series that we really love, and then we have the series that everybody else really loves that we didn't make it to the end. I think the similarity in most of these series is that most of them are not series that I just flung to the side halfway through because I hated them so much that I just couldn't continue. A lot of them are series that I actually just kind of lost steam on or basically lost interest in. A few are series that I came back to later in life and no longer really enjoyed. Most of these I will probably never continue, or at least as of right now, I don't expect to. But that could always change, and as well, there are a couple that I probably do intend to go back to at some point. The first series that I did not finish was The Magician's Trilogy by Grossman. I actually read The Magicians, I think maybe my first year or two in college, right when it came out, and I had no idea that it was supposed to be a series. I'm not even sure if it was supposed to be a series. To me, it read more like a standalone. If you're not familiar, the Magicians is about a high school boy who gets accepted into a college for magic. It got marketed a lot as Harry Potter for grown-ups, but what it really is a exploration of what would it look like if all the things in fantasy books where kids get pulled into other worlds, whether it's, Hogwarts or Narnia. What if all those things were true, but the people were just as petty and small-minded and insecure and shallow and superficial and had all the same problems that people in the real world have, as well as having to deal with all the problems that people in books have. So I really liked The Magicians. I think even though there's a lot of unlikable characters in it, as someone who was in music school at the time, I kind of appreciated the scenario when somebody who's going to college for magic somewhere halfway through is wondering, okay, so once I've picked my major and I have my degree, what exactly do I do as a magician? Nobody ever talks about that. So I thought things like that were really funny and really nice. It's a pretty dark book, and it is sort of a deeply twisted interpretation of Narnia as well. But even though I wouldn't say it had a lot of closure, but it did feel like a standalone for me. And when I realized that there were more books in the series, I kind of felt satisfied with the first one. I figured maybe based on the tone that if each book went through a similar arc to the first one, it didn't feel necessary. It just felt like sort of messing things up and semi-resolving them too much. So I don't know, maybe the second two books in the trilogy are great. I know it got adapted into a TV series that, from what I've heard, was basically okay, but I still feel pretty happy with The Magicians as a standalone. I might even go back and read it at some point, but I'm not sure if I really want to read the second two. So my next series that I stopped halfway is the Lightbringer series by Brent. I actually really loved The Black Prism. I read it pretty soon after it came out. I thought it was just such a huge step up over what he did with the Night Angel trilogy, which was a favorite series of one of my good friends. I thought that the magic system in The Black Prism was really, really good. I thought it was even close to a, Brandon Sanderson level magic system. The characters I liked. It was just, I didn't think the writing was the greatest, I guess, but everything else about the book I thought was really strong, and that it was a start to a really good fantasy series. Then the second book was a little bit of a letdown for me. I didn't hate it or anything though, but then for some reason after that, after book two, I totally lost interest in continuing this series. And to this day, I still have no interest in reading books 3 through 5 of Lightbringer, and I'm not really sure why. Just something about it. After book 2, I kind of felt done, like I'd gotten all the enjoyment I was going to out of the series. But I still think it's a good series, and I've actually recommended it to a few people. My husband read all 5 books, and overall, I think he really enjoyed it, although I think I've heard, mixed opinions on book 5 and the end of the series. But for some reason, this was just a series that I just lost interest totally. So the next one I'll mention is Wheel of Time. I've mentioned a few times that I started Wheel of Time several times as a kid. I think I am not sure anymore if I ever started book 4. I definitely made it into book 3, and I just wasn't really into it. I was also too young. I was a pretty advanced reader as a kid, but those books are just so long, and I probably just didn't have the focus as an 8 or 9-year-old to get through multiple 1,000-page books and really be committed to a series like that. I don't think I read another series. Well, actually back then in the 90s, I'm not even sure if there was another series that was existing on the same scope as Wheel of Time. So I felt for years and years and years that this is a series that I'm supposed to have read, and I just never quite made it. But on the other hand, my best friend loves The Wheel of Time, and she is not somebody, like, she enjoys fantasy and she does read a fair bit of fantasy, but she also really loves classics and Russian literature. And so if she loves a fantasy series, it's not just because she's a hardcore fantasy fan, it's because she really likes the series. So because of that, she's actually been doing a Wheel of Time reread lately, and that just makes me feel like I need to give this series another shot, despite whatever failed attempts I had at it between, say, the ages of 8 through 13. My big problem with this series in the beginning when I did read it was how derivative the first book is of Lord of the Rings, and a lot of older readers told me back then that it's supposed to be an homage to Lord of the Rings, that all those similarities were intentional, it wasn't just supposed to be ripped off. And I'm sure that is true. As an adult, I'm willing to accept that. But as a child, I was very scornful, and I thought that all those people were just making excuses. So I'm gonna have to try to let go of that now as an adult and just accept that there's a lot of Lord of the Rings in the first book and just live with it. From what I've seen and what I do know about The Wheel of Time, it's not just that there's a lot of Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of stuff in there, so maybe that will also make that part of it a little more palatable to me. I have to admit, the fact that Brandon Sanderson finished this series is another thing that makes me feel like I should read it, but I don't think I'm going to get through 12,000-page books just to get to some Brandon Sanderson writing at the end, so I really hope that I do better with The Wheel of Time next time I try. The next series I want to mention is the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. I haven't heard anyone mention this series recently. I think it's a great series that for me just dragged on a little bit too long. There are 9 books in this series. They're not terribly long, but I sort of just got sick of it by the end. But it's still one of my favorite series overall because I just really love the premise and the way she writes it. If you're not familiar, Temeraire is about a sort of alternate history Napoleonic Wars where humans have, well, not exactly domesticated dragons because dragons are as intelligent as people, but there is, as well as the Navy, there is an air force that is made up of dragons, and people battle from dragons as if they are ships, and different cultures all around the world have different roles that dragons play in their society, ranging from China, where they are very, very respected, to England, where they are not really seen as equivalent to people. A lot of people are still seeing them as animals, even though they're intelligent. And it has sort of a master and commander, but with dragons vibe. I have always really liked sort of naval warfare stories. I even liked the Master and Commander movie with Russell Crowe that I don't think anybody but me liked. My husband is shaking his head off camera. But I really enjoyed that movie. And I really enjoyed the Temeraire books kind of for some of the same reasons. It has a great central friendship between Captain Will Lawrence and his dragon Temeraire, and they go all over the globe, eventually to different countries. So you get to visit Africa and South America, and I think eventually Japan, although I don't think I read that one. And I think to me, even though I felt like Novik did a good job varying things up by introducing different cultures and having the characters travel very widely, it still kind of felt by the end of the series like it was the same thing over and over again. Like they would do something, they would sort of fall into disgrace for some reason, and eventually they would have adventures and sort of get redeemed by the end. So I think I read like 7 of these books out of 9. To me, the ones I really remember are the first 3, maybe the first 4, but I still highly recommend this series. This is one I would not be averse to finishing. I just got kind of tired of it by the end, and I kind of have the feeling that the author did too. The last series that I have not finished, and to be fair, it's not a complete series, is A Song of Ice and Fire. I told this story in my very first video on this channel. I read A Game of Thrones, and actually the first 3 books in the series When I was probably early high school age, I was about 13. And I really liked the books at the time. They were totally different than any of the fantasy that I had read up to that point. I think it was George R.R. Martin that really opened my eyes a bit more to modern fantasy at that time, as well as I feel like even Robin Hobb then was a little bit darker than a lot of the stuff I had grown up reading to that point. So I really loved A Game of Thrones. I loved A Song of Ice and Fire, and one of my good friends also really enjoyed the books, so they were books that we read and talked about in high school. I remember when A Feast for Crows came out. It had already been a long time since the previous book, and that book, if you'll remember, was kind of a disappointment because it was only half a book. He split out half the viewpoints and said, oh, don't worry, the rest of the book is already basically written, so it should be out next year. And then I think it was another, I don't know, at least 5 years until A Dance with Dragons came out. So after that, it had been a while since any of the books were published. The TV series comes out and becomes this really huge deal. And suddenly everyone seems to know about this series that I had read as a kid and enjoyed. And that was kind of a weird moment for me. That was when I was in college. I didn't have a subscription to HBO. I'm not sure if they had even online subscriptions back then. I think your only options were probably TV or pirating online. So my friend and I got the first series on DVD after it came out. We had the first season and we sat down and we watched the first couple episodes, and neither of us was really into it. And I actually found it kind of hard to watch. Sorry, spoilers for the very beginning of Game of Thrones, if somehow you don't know about this, but Bran gets pushed out from a tower and falls, and I was like, that's pretty horrible. It's suddenly some of the things that were fine to read about when I was a 13-year-old were kind of bothering me when I was older. And I even went back to the books after that, and I also found it, like, the grittiness of it didn't really appeal to me anymore. It felt a little bit too real suddenly. So I think I've just become a little softer as I've gotten older. The stuff that I could read at age 13 with no empathy kind of bothers me a little bit now. So I don't know. I just lost interest in reading that series anymore. And I still haven't read A Dance with Dragons. And I probably won't read, if he publishes any more books in the series, hypothetically, I probably won't read those either. But I have kept up with all the spoilers for both the show and the books. The internet is great for that, so don't worry, I'm still very well versed in this series, but I sort of lost interest in reading it. And sometimes that happens, I think, when there's something that's really iconic, but it's coming out over a very long period of time. Sometimes by the time the later books come out, you're just not the same person you were at the beginning, and I guess that's okay. But it is weird when something that was a favorite becomes something that you just don't really want to read anymore. So there are probably other series that I haven't finished, but in terms of series that I really like or that were favorites that I haven't finished, that's my list. I'm curious to hear if there are any series that you started and liked at the beginning and then ended up not finishing, and if so, let me know what those were.